There are towns scattered across Australia where you can buy a house for less than the stamp duty on a Sydney apartment. Towns where councils are giving land away for free, begging people to come and build something. Towns that were abandoned because they were too remote, too hot, too contaminated, or too economically dead to sustain human life. And the shocking thing is, people are moving to them, paying to live in them, and even building communities in the ruins of other communities that gave up. And the more you look at the specifics of each place, the more disturbing the picture gets. Right? Let's get on with it. Starting at number 10 is Silverton, New South Wales. 50 people, 3,000 at peak. Silverton is 26 kilometers northwest of Broken Hill, and it has been appearing on film and television screens for so long that most Australians think they know what it looks like. They do know what it looks like. They have seen it in Mad Max 2, in Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, in Mission Impossible 2, in over 140 films and commercials. The outback light, the colonial buildings sitting at odd angles in the dust, the wide, empty streets, the Silverton Hotel with the Mad Max car parked out front. It is one of the most photographed townscapes in the country. Silverton peaked at around 3,000 people in the 1880s during a silver rush. When richer deposits were discovered at Broken Hill, just down the road, the miners packed up their iron and canvas houses, literally loaded them onto wagons, and carted them to the next opportunity. By 1901, fewer than 300 people remained. The municipality was dissolved in 1907. By the time Mad Max 2 filmed there in 1981, the population was already down to a rump of locals, artists, and people drawn by the landscape. Today, roughly 50 people live in Silverton. Most of them work in tourism, running galleries, staffing the hotel, and generally being the human scenery in a town that earns its income by looking the way it looks. Some are artists genuinely drawn by what the locals describe as a quality of light unlike anywhere else in Australia. The desert air, the absence of humidity, the way the afternoon sun hits the red soil, and the weathered stone produces a clarity that painters and photographers have been chasing for 50 years. The honest description of what Silverton has become is a living set. The 50 people who pay to live there are part of a heritage tourism product. They maintain the atmosphere. The donkeys that wander the main street have become unofficial mascots. The graves in the 42-acre cemetery record the mining accidents and typhoid epidemics and infant deaths that marked the original settlement. The people who stay do so because the town's identity as a ghost town is the only economic reason for it to exist at all. Remove the cameras and the tourists, and Silverton is a cluster of historic buildings in a landscape with no industry, no jobs, and no reason to be there except beauty. And beauty alone has never been enough to keep an Australian town alive. Number 9. Cook, South Australia. Population 4. Cook sits on the Nullarbor Plain, 478 kilometers from the nearest town in either direction. It was built in 1917 to service the Transcontinental Railway, and at its small peak it had a hospital, a school, a swimming pool, a golf course, and a population of around 200. The residents planted 600 gum trees in 1982, creating the only shade on a stretch of desert that stretches to the horizon in every direction. When the railway was privatized in 1997, the operator kept Cook only as a fuel stop and driver changeover point. The school closed, the hospital closed, the pool was filled in. The population dropped to 4 people, all of them employees of Pacific National, the rail company, who maintain the ghost of the town so that trains can continue to use it. The 4 people who live in Cook today did not choose it in any conventional sense. They accepted postings that most Australians would refuse, regardless of the pay package. Their social world is each other and the occasional train passengers, who are allowed off for 30 minutes to photograph the condemned school and buy a fridge magnet before reboarding. The gum trees the community planted in 1982, back when the town believed in its own future, are now the tallest things on the Nullarbor Plain. They provide shade in a landscape that otherwise offers none. The trees outlasted the community that planted them. The 4 people in Cook are not paying to live in a ghost town as a lifestyle choice. They are working in one because someone has to. But their presence maintains the legal fiction that Cook is still a functioning settlement, which has its own particular quality of disturbing. Number 8. Birdsville, Queensland. Population 140. Birdsville sits at the edge of the Simpson Desert in far southwest Queensland, on 1,590 kilometers west of Brisbane, and about 360 kilometers from the nearest town of any significance. Mail arrives by plane when roads are passable. The temperature regularly exceeds 50 degrees Celsius. In a good year, the dirt roads stay open long enough for supplies to arrive consistently. 140 people have chosen to live there permanently. They pay for houses there, pay for groceries that are trucked in at inflated prices because of the distance, pay for utilities generated by systems maintained in near total isolation. Some were born there and describe the open space as the only life they can imagine. Some relocated deliberately, looking for something cities could not provide. Some work on the surrounding cattle stations, where the economic logic of remote work justifies the remote location. Every September, the Birdsville races happen. The population swells from 140 to over 6,000 for a weekend of outback horse racing, and the town becomes briefly, explosively, the most densely populated square kilometer of desert in Australia. Then everyone leaves, and Birdsville returns to what it is for the other 51 weeks of the year. The pub serves as community center, gossip exchange, emergency coordination point, and social glue. When something goes wrong out there, your neighbors are your first responders, because anyone else is hours away. The disturbing dimension to Birdsville is not the isolation. People have always chosen to live in remote places for their own reasons. The disturbing dimension is what Birdsville represents in the context of Australian housing in 2025. A town of 140 people at the edge of the Simpson Desert has cheaper housing and lower cost of living than the outer suburbs of any major Australian city. The median multiple, the ratio of house price to household income, at Birdsville is not 13.8. It is not even close. But the trade-off for getting off that treadmill is living somewhere so remote that your closest medical facility involves a flight and your nearest full-service hospital is a day's travel. That is not a lifestyle choice for most people. That is the shape of what Australia's housing market has made available to those who want to own something outright. Number 7. Farina, South Australia. Seasonal volunteers. Last permanent residents left in the early 1980s. Farina is not a town where people live. The last permanent residents left decades ago. But it is very much a place where people choose to spend significant time, pay to camp, and in some cases donate months of skilled labor every single year. And the reason why is genuinely strange once you sit with it. The Farina Restoration Group was formed in 2008 when a retired man from Victoria named Tom Harding drove through the ruins and decided he needed to save them. Since 2009, a working bee has operated every winter, from May to July, bringing volunteers from across Australia to restore the stone buildings, reopen the underground bakery, maintain the cemetery, and build walking trails through the ruins. By 2018, 205 participants donated 18,138 volunteer hours in a single year. Carpenters, stonemasons, bakers, historians, retirees, and tradespeople all paying their own way to the outback to give their time to a town that has been empty for 40 years. Why? It is worth pausing on the question because the answer goes somewhere surprising. Farina was built in 1878 by farmers who believed the outback could be turned into a wheat belt. The name means flour in Latin, named by settlers who were told by the climate that they were wrong but refused to accept it. The town peaked at around 600 people, had 2 hotels, 2 breweries, a bakery, a bank, a brothel, and a school. It had enough community to sustain all the institutions a community requires. Then the rains stopped being unusual. Then the Ghan Railway rerouted. The school closed in 1957, the post office in 1960, the general store in 1967. The last residents drifted out in the early 1980s. But the people who travel to Farina every winter and do back-breaking stone restoration work are not doing it for the history alone. They are doing it because in modern Australia there is almost nowhere left where a retired tradesperson or a skilled builder can use their hands in a way that matters to a community and leaves something permanent behind. Farina offers that. It offers belonging, purpose, collective effort with tangible results, the pleasure of fixing something with your hands in a place where fixing it matters. The underground bakery, restored after nearly a century of dormancy, still bakes bread in the original wood-fired Scotch oven during the working season. The smell of that bread in the outback desert draws visitors from the highway for kilometers. What Farina reveals is a social need that modern Australian cities, with their anonymity and transactional relationships, have difficulty meeting. The people who go there are not running away from something. They are going towards something that urban life rarely provides. That is a commentary on the city as much as it is a commentary on the ghost town. Number 6. Queenstown, Tasmania. Population 1,700. Queenstown is not technically a ghost town, but it has all the qualities of one. Sitting on Tasmania's west coast, over 3.5 hours from Hobart, it was built around copper mining, and it has been shrinking steadily since the mines declined. The population has dropped from over 5,000 at peak. Abandoned houses line streets originally designed for a much larger community. The local school once had hundreds of students. The infrastructure, the roads, the utilities, the civic buildings, all of it was built for a population that no longer exists. The reason people still pay to live in Queenstown is one of the most purely Australian economic calculations you will find anywhere. Median house prices there sit between $150,000 and $190,000. Entry-level properties sometimes come in under $140,000. For a 2 to 3 bedroom brick home on a proper block in a town with a hospital, a supermarket, schools, and basic services, those numbers represent something that has essentially vanished from the Australian mainland. But the catch is right there in the numbers. Those prices exist because the underlying economy that built the town no longer exists at scale. Employment is limited. Queenstown is over 3.5 hours from Hobart on roads that deteriorate in winter. Young people leave for university or work, and a significant fraction do not come back. The median age climbs. The schools serve shrinking student bodies. The supermarket stocks what the population buys, and the population is aging toward the goods and services an aging population needs. The people who pay to live in Queenstown are making a specific trade. They are swapping urban convenience, economic opportunity, and proximity to everything for the ability to own something outright without spending decades in mortgage servitude. For retirees with superannuation, for remote workers whose income is not tied to location, for people who have genuinely decided that shelter is worth more than career advancement, the trade pencils out. but it pencils out against a backdrop where the alternative is spending 45% of household income on housing in a city that is getting less livable as it gets more expensive. Number 5. Menzies, Western Australia. Population approximately 150. Menzies is in the Western Australian goldfields, 130 kilometers north of Kalgoorlie. Kalgoorlie is the nearest significant town, itself 600 kilometers from Perth. At its peak during the 1890s gold rush, Menzies had a population of around 10,000. It had a functioning economy, civic infrastructure, and a future it believed in. By the time the gold played out, most of that was gone. What remains is a town of about 150 people living in what is simultaneously a functioning settlement and a heritage site of its own decline. The Grand Hotel still operates, and serving the handful of people who live there and the occasional travelers passing through. The main street has empty lots where buildings used to stand. Some structures are preserved. Some are in states of arrested decay, still standing but long past their functional life. Entry-level land in Menzies has sold for as little as $2,000 to $10,000. Houses, where they exist and are habitable, are among the cheapest freehold property available anywhere in Australia. The people who pay to live in Menzies are a mix of long-term residents who stayed through the entire decline, artists who came for the isolation and stayed for the strange Bhutan Army emergency relief in a recent survey. A declining ghost town in the Western Australian goldfields is not the worst housing option available to ordinary Australians. That comparison between Menzies and the contemporary Australian housing market is the thing that should be making policymakers uncomfortable. Number 4. The Western Australian wheat belt free land towns. Several shires across the Western Australian wheat belt, including Marawa, Nungarin, Karnama, Kulin, and the Shire of Merredin, have at various points been offering free residential land to anyone willing to build a house and stay for a minimum period, typically 3 to 5 years. These are not ghost towns in the strictest sense. People still live there. But the populations are small, declining, and the fact that councils have resorted to giving land away to stop the bleeding tells you everything you need to know about what is happening. Nungarin has a population of around 70 people. In a previous generation, that would describe a single apartment building in Docklands. The Shire offers free blocks of around 1,000 square meters with building requirements and minimum residency periods. You get the land for nothing. You provide the $300,000 to $350,000 required to build a modest house on it, and you commit to living there for 3 to 5 years. The economics are honest and unsettling simultaneously. A total housing cost of $300,000 to $350,000 in regional Western Australia versus a total housing cost of well over $1 million in any Perth suburb with access to functional services and employment. The trade-off is severe. Nungarin has a general store and some community facilities, and Merredin is about 40 kilometers away. But secondary school means boarding. Hospital means driving. Specialist medical care means serious planning. Employment for people not in agriculture, government services, or remote work means accepting that career progression is not part of the deal. What the Freeland programs reveal, stripped of the marketing language of regional opportunity and lifestyle choice, is that Australian councils in these areas are watching their communities die and doing the only thing they have left. They are using land, the one asset they control, to try to buy time. The fact that multiple councils in one state are simultaneously running these programs indicates not an interesting regional anomaly, but a structural failure of the economic geography of a country that continues to funnel growth and investment into a handful of coastal capitals while the rest of it empties out. The people who take up these offers are not wrong to do so. For the right person, in the right circumstances, owning a house debt-free in regional Australia while working remotely is a genuinely viable and even attractive life. But the offer exists because the alternative for those communities is slow extinction. That is the context that the council brochures tend to skip. Number 3. Coober Pedy, South Australia. Population approximately 2,000. Roughly 60% living underground. Coober Pedy is the most famous ghost town that is not technically a ghost town in Australia, and it is famous for the most surreal possible reason. Most of its residents live underground. The town sits 840 kilometers north of Adelaide in the South Australian outback, and it produces approximately 85% of the world's supply of opals. The original miners who settled there beginning in 1915 discovered that the 50-degree-plus surface temperatures of the outback summer were survivable if you went underground, where the sandstone maintained a constant temperature of around 23 degrees Celsius year-round. So they dug their homes, then their churches, then their hotels, then their hairdressers and their pool rooms and their bookshops. A whole subterranean civic life developed below a surface that looks, from above, like a moonscape of mullock heaps and ventilation pipes. Coober Pedy is genuinely one of the most unusual human settlements on Earth. It is also, in 2024 and 2025, in the grip of crime rates significantly higher than the national average. In 2024, the town recorded 262 reported assaults, 152 break-and-enters, and 137 cases of property damage, all for a population of around 2,000. Police services cease at 3 a.m., leaving residents unprotected through the early morning hours when much of the reported activity concentrates. An elderly man with pancreatic cancer was beaten in his home by thieves who smashed his door in, stealing $400 in cash, and was not found until the following midday. Business owners describe tourists being targeted by aggressive begging and antisocial behavior that has noticeably reduced visitor numbers. A Washington Post investigation in early 2025 revealed another dimension of Coober Pedy that does not appear in the tourism materials. White residents live in the cool underground dugouts. Aboriginal residents in significant numbers live above ground in the heat, often without functioning air conditioning. When an Aboriginal woman named Sonia Crombie's air conditioner broke in the outback summer, there was no tunnel for her to take refuge in. The underground living revolution of Coober Pedy, celebrated as a quirky human adaptation to extreme conditions, maps almost exactly onto the racial geography of the town. People pay to live in Coober Pedy because opal mining offers the possibility of a life-changing find. They pay to live there because the housing costs, $85,000 to $100,000 median, are among the lowest in South Australia. They pay to live there because it is genuinely unlike anywhere else on the planet, and that strangeness has its own attraction. But they are also paying to live in a place where police leave at 3 a.m., where elderly residents get beaten in their beds, where the summer will kill you if the infrastructure fails, and where the racial geography of who lives underground and who lives above it sits visibly in plain view. Number 2. The coal and the Coober Pedy of the East. Queenstown's counterpart, Hill End, New South Wales. Population approximately 120. Actually, the second most disturbing entry on this list is something more systemic. It is the trend. Between 2020 and 2022, Australia's housing market went through the largest price surge in its modern history. Home values rose by approximately 47.3% over 5 years, adding roughly $280,000 to the median dwelling value according to Cotality data released at the end of 2025. The rental market tightened simultaneously. 7 in 10 Australians who sought Salvation Army emergency assistance in a 2025 survey reported housing stress, spending more than 30% of disposable income on housing. Nearly 1 in 3 could not pay rent or mortgage on time in the prior year. After housing and essential expenses, the average respondent had $6 per week left over. AMP estimates the housing shortfall in Australia at somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000 homes for the existing population. The federal government has committed $21 billion to build 1.2 million new homes over 5 years. But construction industry capacity constraints, planning system delays, and rising building costs mean that target is widely considered unreachable at the pace the market requires. The result of all of this is a slow drift toward places that were not supposed to be livable again. People are moving to regional towns not because they want regional lives, but because they have been priced out of everything else. They are filling up the towns that the economic gravity of Sydney and Melbourne partially emptied. They are taking up the free land offers in the wheat belt, the cheap properties in the goldfields, the dugouts in Coober Pedy, the galleries in Silverton. They are making rational calculations inside a housing market that has become so irrational that the rational calculation points outward to the edges of the map. That drift is what is genuinely disturbing about the 10 towns on this list. Not the towns themselves, not the people who chose them, but the system that made abandoning the comfortable middle of Australian life and heading for the ghost towns the financially sensible option. Number 1. Wittenoom, Western Australia. Population 0. Officially. And yet people refuse to leave. Wittenoom is the most disturbing entry on this list, not because of what happens there now, but because of what the refusal to leave says about everything that came before it. Wittenoom was Australia's main source of blue asbestos, which is crucidolite, the most dangerous form of the mineral during the 1950s and 1960s. Between 1943 and 1966, 161,000 tons of it were mined from the Pilbara Gorge. The health risks were known to company doctors and government health officials from the beginning. Workers were not told. Children played in the asbestos tailings. The tailings surfaced the roads, the schoolyard, the airport runway. The fine blue fibers hung in the air. Over 2,000 former residents and workers have died from asbestos-related diseases. The number is likely an undercount. Mesothelioma, the cancer caused by the exposure, has a latency period of 20 to 60 years, meaning people who were children in Wittenoom in the 1950s are still dying from it today. The Western Australian government began trying to close Wittenoom in the late 1970s. It degazetted the town in 2007, removed it from maps and road signs. It disconnected power and water. It offered compensation to residents to leave. It passed the Wittenoom Closure Bill in 2022 to compulsorily acquire the last remaining properties. The last resident was removed in 2023. Demolition began in May 2023. But the refusal of some residents to leave Wittenoom, stretching across decades of official pressure, is not simply stubbornness or denial. Some of them were old. Some had built their whole lives in a town that happened to be built on blue asbestos, and the cost of relocating, financially and psychologically, was enormous. Some genuinely believed the contamination risk was exaggerated. Some were simply in a country where housing options outside major cities had narrowed so severely that even a condemned, contaminated, a legally delisted town represented a form of shelter worth holding on to. That last point deserves to be said directly. Australia in 2025 has a housing market so broken that the gap between the most desirable and the least desirable places to live has become a moral and economic crisis. The median house price in Sydney is $1.75 million. A person earning median income needs 20 to 30 years to save the deposit. 71% of people seeking emergency assistance report housing stress. Rental vacancies in major cities are near historic lows. And at the other end of the map, councils are giving land away for free in shrinking wheat belt towns. Ghost towns are attracting artists and retirees and remote workers who calculated that shelter matters more than opportunity. A contaminated dead town in the Pilbara had residents who refused to leave even after the government removed them from official maps. The 10 towns on this list are not the story. They are symptoms of the story. The story is a country that built itself around an urban coastal core and left everywhere else to hollow out, that allowed housing to become an investment vehicle instead of a place to live, that created a market where the rational response for ordinary Australians without generational wealth is to do the math on whether a mining ghost town in the outback makes more financial sense than renting a one-bedroom apartment where the deposit alone costs more than an entire house in Menzies. The real reason people are paying to live in Australia's ghost towns is not that the ghost towns are appealing. It is that the alternative has become genuinely unaffordable for a growing number of ordinary people. And when the most financially sensible response to a housing crisis is to move somewhere that was abandoned because no one wanted to live there, the crisis has gone somewhere the brochures cannot follow.